When search teams find someone who froze to death, there's a detail that rarely makes the news. Many of them are found undressed, coat off, boots off, sometimes folded and set aside like they were getting ready for bed. It happens often enough that investigators gave it a name, and I'll tell you why before this section ends. Because that one detail explains cold better than anything else can. Now set another image beside it. A man in a parked car, 10 miles from his own driveway, full tank of gas. A hiker with $400 of gear still on his back. A man dead in his living room after 2 days without power. All of it in a country wired for heat. Now go back 200 years. Wind River Country, Wyoming, 1830. 40 below. No thermometer, no forecast, no rescue coming. Not tomorrow, not ever. He owns animal skins, a wool blanket, a flintlock, and a knife. That's the entire list. By every rule we believe in, he should be dead before sunrise. He wakes up. He boils coffee. He goes out to check his traps. And he does it again the next morning, and the one after that, for 40 years. He didn't have better gear than the people dying today. He had better answers. Cold isn't one enemy, cold is four, and he knew all four by name without ever hearing the words. But the four aren't the real secret. The real secret is what he did in the last 10 minutes before he slept every night. And it's the exact opposite of what every survival manual will tell you. It sounds like a mistake. It's the reason he kept waking up. Stay with me. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. The first killer was the ground. Frozen earth drinks heat out of a body all night and is never satisfied. A man can freeze from the ground up while his chest is still warm. The earth is patient. It has all night. So his first act in camp, before food, before fire, was a foot of pine boughs and dry grass, not comfort, trapped air. The second killer rode the wind, and people get this backwards. Wind doesn't make you cold. Wind steals the warm air you already made. 40 below with a 20-mile-an-hour wind behaves like 70 below, and bare skin freezes in minutes. So he wore a shell the wind couldn't cross, and picked camp like a fortress. Behind rock, deep in timber, a pocket of still air. The third killer was silent. Heat radiating off a body into an empty sky that never stops pulling. That's why he wore his wool cap to bed and pulled the robe over his head. And you've heard a number about heat lost through your head. Hold on to it. In a few minutes I'll show you why it's wrong, and why the truth is worse. The fourth he feared most, because it came from inside him. Sweat. Water leaving skin pulls heat away 25 times faster than dry air. So he stripped down while he still felt fine, and dressed again the second he stopped. Cotton cas, they said. A wet cotton shirt isn't clothing. It's a shroud you're still walking around in. Now, the undressing. In the last stage of freezing, the vessels holding blood deep in the core give out all at once. Warm blood floods the skin and the person feels heat. Real, burning heat. So they take off their coat. Cold doesn't just kill you. At the end, it talks you into helping. He never thought of cold as weather. He thought of it as something that could lie to him. 3 of those 4 he fought with what he wore. The 4th he fought with what he ate. We'll get there. Let's close that loop first because it matters. You've heard that you lose 40% of your body heat through your head. That number is wrong. It traces back to a military cold weather study in the 1950s, run on men who were bundled up everywhere except their heads, which is a little like testing how much water leaks from a bucket by leaving one hole open. The honest figure is closer to 10%, about what you'd expect from that much skin. But here's the part that should bother you more than the myth. He didn't cover his head to save 40%. He covered it because the scalp is the one place on your body where you cannot feel the heat leaving. Fingers burn, toes ache, your head just goes quiet. By the time you notice your scalp is cold, you've been bleeding warmth into the sky for an hour, and out there, an hour was the whole margin between a man and the end of him. So he slept in his wool cap. Every night. Even when he was warm. That cap was the top of a system, and the foundation of that system was wool. Wool can take on something like 30% of its own weight in water and still feel dry against the skin, and still hold roughly 80% of the insulation it started with. Nothing else in his world did that. The wool he wore was often greasy wool, never fully scoured, the natural lanolin still in the fiber. It smelled faintly of oil and animal. It shed light water on its own, and it lasted, season after season, in a life that destroyed everything else he owned. Over the wool went brain-tanned buckskin, and that shirt was his windbreak. Tanned with the animal's own brain worked into the hide, it came out soft enough to move with him, and dense enough that wind couldn't push through it. He rubbed it with bear grease or beaver fat until the leather drank it in, and that gave him a few hours of protection from snow and light rain. But buckskin had a fatal flaw, and he never forgot it. Soak it through and it stops insulating entirely. It goes heavy, then stiff, then it holds him like a cast made of cold. Wet buckskin has killed men who did everything else right. Which is why the last layer existed, the capote. A hooded coat cut from a Hudson's Bay point blanket, 4-point, roughly 72 by 90 inches, about 8 pounds of dense wool, long enough to cover him past the knees. Those short black lines woven into the edge, the points, weren't decoration. They were a unit of trade. That blanket had a price in beaver pelts, and everybody in the fur country knew it. So when he pulled that coat over his head in a storm, understand what he was actually doing. He wasn't wearing a coat. He was wearing money, and he'd decided that staying alive was worth more. And none of it worked unless he worked it. This was not a jacket you put on in the morning. Chopping wood, breaking trail, hauling traps. He stripped layers off while he was still comfortable, because comfortable meant he was about to sweat. The second he stopped moving, everything went back on, immediately, before the chill could find him. Constant adjustment, all day, every day. But wool and leather and grease only keep the heat you've already made. Making heat was a different craft entirely. Making heat came down to 3 objects he would not be separated from, and men called them the Holy Trinity: flint, steel, and charcloth. The flint was a hard stone with a sharp edge. The steel was not just any scrap. It had to be high-carbon steel, hard enough that when the flint scraped it, it sheared off microscopic curls of metal that ignited in midair from the friction alone. That's what a spark actually is: burning steel. Most of these men forged their own strikers out of worn-out files and rasps because they knew a file had the carbon in it to throw a good spark. But flint and steel alone give you nothing. A spark lives for a fraction of a second. Something has to catch it. And that's the third piece, the one that made the whole system work. Charcloth. Linen or cotton sealed in a small tin with a single pinhole punched in the lid and set in the coals. As it heats, the cloth vents smoke through that hole, and when the smoke stops, it's finished. What comes out is black, brittle, and useless for anything except the one thing it does perfectly. It catches a spark and holds it as a glowing ember without bursting into flame. It's the bridge between a spark that dies instantly and a fire that lasts all night. From there, he moved the ember into a tinder bundle, a nest of shredded cedar bark, dry grass, cattail down, folded around the coal like something he was protecting. Then he breathed, steady and gentle. Too hard kills it, too soft starves it. And then that low whoosh, and there was fire. But he never trusted a single method. He might carry a burning glass to pull fire straight out of the sun on a clear day. He knew the bow drill, wood on wood, slow and brutal, but it worked with nothing but what the forest gave him. Because out there, The man with only one way to make fire was already dead. He just didn't know the date yet. And he read wood the way we read a page. Standing deadwood was dry inside even during a rainstorm, so he took his fuel from trees that had died on their feet. Birch bark carried enough oil to burn while it was still wet. Softwoods like pine caught fast and hot to get him started. Hardwoods like oak burned slow and left him a bed of coals that would still be alive at dawn. And his fires weren't piles, they were built. A reflector fire with a wall of logs behind it, throwing heat back into his shelter instead of letting it escape into the dark. A star fire, logs laid like spokes on a wheel, fed inward through the night so he barely had to wake. A Dakota fire hole, dug into the ground with an air tunnel feeding it from below, burning clean in high wind and hiding its light from anyone who might be watching. But here's what the fire really was. And this is the part almost nobody talks about. Some of these men went 4 or 5 months without hearing another human voice. Read their journals, and Osborne Russell kept one of the best of them through the 1830s. And the same thing surfaces again and again. They talked to the fire. They gave it names. They apologized to it when they let it go out. Because a fire in that country was never just warmth. A fire was the last piece of proof that you still belonged to the world of people. It was the only thing out there that moved when you moved, that answered when you fed it. Men who lost their fire didn't just get cold. Something in them went quiet, and some of them never got it back. The fuel was fat. Understand that his body was the only heat source that never went out. And in that cold, it burned through something on the order of 5,000 to 6,000 calories a day just to keep him upright and working. You cannot eat your way to that number on lean meat. So he hunted differently than we imagine. He wasn't hunting for meat, he was hunting for fat. A buffalo cow in autumn, after a summer on prairie grass, carried a layer of back fat that could run several inches thick. And that was the prize, not the steak. A bear in the weeks before hibernation was a walking storehouse of calories. He ate the parts we throw away. Tongue, liver, bone marrow cracked out with the back of a knife blade. And beaver tail, 2 or 3 pounds of nearly pure fat, roasted over the coals until the black skin blistered and peeled off in sheets, leaving something rich and oily underneath that these men wrote about the way other people write about wine. And he knew what happened to men who ignored this. They called it rabbit starvation, and the native peoples of the North had their own name for it. A man can eat lean meat until his stomach is full 3 times a day and still starve to death, because without fat or carbohydrate, the body cannot process that much protein. It poisons itself trying. The symptoms come slow: weakness, headache, a hunger that eating doesn't touch, and then the end, with food still in the pack. It killed men who thought they were doing fine. So he preserved fat the way we preserve money. He rendered buffalo tallow that kept for months without turning. He dried meat into strips that weighed almost nothing. And he made pemmican, dried meat pounded to powder, mixed with rendered fat and sometimes berries, packed solid. Around 3,000 calories in a single pound, and it would keep for years. Now stop for a second and look back at everything I've described to you. Brain-tanned leather, the bough bed, layering fat before winter, pemmican. The mountain man invented none of it, not one piece. He learned it from Crow women who tanned hides better than any European ever managed, from Shoshone hunters, from Cree and Métis families who had been solving this exact problem in this exact country for thousands of years before a white man ever laid eyes on the Rockies. Pemmican isn't even an English word. It's Cree. So the story we tell ourselves, the lone American conquering the wilderness, has it backwards. He didn't beat that country. He was taught by the people who already knew it. And the ones who refused to be taught are the ones who didn't come back. And some of them did come back, again and again, which is the strangest part. John Coulter, in 1808, stripped of everything he owned and forced to run for his life across open country with no fire, no weapon, no clothes. Walked into a trading post days later, alive. Jim Bridger spent the better part of 40 years in those mountains, in that cold, and the wilderness never got him. He died in a bed in Missouri, an old man, blind, on a farm, telling stories that nobody believed anymore. That's what this knowledge bought, not glory, an ordinary old age, which out there was the rarest thing there was. So here it is, the thing he did every single night that every instinct you have screams against. He took a layer off before he got into his robes, and he ate fat right before he closed his eyes. Everything in you says pile it on and sleep warm. He knew better, because he'd seen what happens to a man who climbs into his bedding already warm. That man sweats in his sleep. He doesn't feel it happening. And at 3 a.m, he wakes up soaked in a robe that has stopped working, hours from sunrise with nothing left to change into. So he went to bed slightly cold, on purpose, uncomfortable for 10 or 15 minutes, and let his own body close that gap and hold it there all night. And the fat? Fat digests slow. It burns for hours after everything else is gone. He wasn't eating dinner before bed. He was loading the stove. That's it. That's the whole secret. Not gear, not toughness, just knowing which discomfort costs you nothing and which one kills you, and being willing to choose the cold one first. And that's the part we lost. And I want to be careful how I say this because I don't think we lost it by being weak. We didn't lose this knowledge, we traded it. We traded it for thermostats and overnight shipping and a light that comes on when we flip a switch, and honestly, it was a good trade. I'm not asking anybody to give it back. I like my furnace. But every trade has a price, and here's ours. We've forgotten that comfort and safety are not the same thing. Comfort is something you buy. Safety is something you know. And the difference between them doesn't show up on an ordinary Tuesday. It shows up the night the power goes out and stays out. Because here's what he understood that we don't. The cold was never cruel to him. Cruelty takes attention, and the cold has none to give. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't know you're there. It will take everything you have with exactly the same patience it takes from a stone or a river or a fallen tree, and it will not notice when you're gone. There's no beating something like that. There's only learning it. And that knowledge made him humble. And out in that country, humility wasn't a virtue, it was a survival skill. The proud ones are the ones buried out there. His knowledge was never bought. It was earned, written in the scars on his hands and in the names of friends he put in ground too frozen to dig properly. Every rule I've given you today, somebody died to learn. So the next time the power goes out and the house goes quiet and the cold starts coming up through the floor and you feel that first small flicker of something you can't quite name, ask yourself the only question that ever mattered out there. Not, what do I have? But what do I know? If this changed how you think about cold, subscribe, because next time we're going somewhere colder. I want to show you how the Athabascan people built houses that held heat at 40 below, in country where winter runs 7 months, with no metal, no glass, and not a single nail. They solved a problem we'd need an engineering degree to solve, and they solved it with dirt, wood, and knowledge passed down by voice. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America.